From my own personal experiences, anytime a police officer has been in my house, I have never given to about their race. I'm just seeing police officers in my house and I'm scared.
Welcome to Bridge the Gap, a show where we aim to build a bridge of understanding between opposing views. Each episode you'll see our participants sit down to discuss some thought-provoking statements.
There is a need for more black police officers.
If they disagree with the statement, they'll leave their seat and allow those that agree to explain themselves.
It supposes the idea that, again, that putting black people in the police force means we come with a certain ideology or political opinion.
Those that disagree then return and express themselves to the rest of the group.
Even if you get like a reflective police force, you're getting these people who relate to the culture, all of that kind of stuff, to do extra work compared to their white counterparts.
Hopefully building a bridge of understanding.
While that is extra work, that is the job.
Let's see what happens.
I think you're a good person to start, right?
I mean, I suppose it depends on how you define a gang. So my name is Demetrius Washington. I'm a police officer in Birmingham. I suppose the word gang comes with negative connotations, but if you, maybe with some without them, I guess technically, yeah, it's true. When you say it in a sentence like that, I think it automatically makes them feel more oppressive, more forceful than maybe they should be, but technically it's not true. Though technically it's true, sorry.
Is that not how you interpreted the word gang in that sentence? My name is Ayaz Ali and I work in media.
Technical definition, yes, but it doesn't have to come with those connotations. But I think what's really, really important is making progress. I think it'd be ignorant to say that the battle is won, that everything is exactly how it should be and how it should stay.
What's your views on the gang?
I think that it's a defined group in the sense that it follows its own rules. If you don't necessarily cooperate or if you're not a part of it, you might be vulnerable in some ways.
Don't your gang do that?
Do my gang do that?
Yeah, everyone's got their own gang.
Maybe you're right, in which case the question's moot, right? Like,
Well, the goalpost doesn't move, does it? It's not about what we selectively interpret a gang to be. A gang has an objective definition. Name's Sean Flores, do influencing, podcast, work in the legalization of cannabis. Like, I'm not saying that the police aren't a gang, but we all have our own gangs. Like the friends that I have, they're my own gang. I'll protect my friends above everybody else. So we have our own values, we have our own metrics by which we measure things.
All right,
what is your sense of a gang?
To be fair, yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe we're all a part of our own gangs then. Maybe that's a fair point. In the UK and in the US and in a lot of developed Western societies, police brutality has been an issue for as long as there's been police.
Too long.
So you've got to think like, why does that still persist?
In short, on my understanding, you're saying it's been an issue for a while. We've existed for a while, so why is it not solved by now?
Kind of. Like, what would your answer be?
I think there's a lot of progress that needs to be made, but it's slow, and it's often slower than general society. I think that's the same for the police, historically, as it would be for, say, a government. It's usually the community, the people whose opinions or views shift, and then once that hits like a critical mass, the people in charge then get dragged along. Progress has been made hugely, even from 20, 30 years ago. The progress is huge, particularly in like the major cities, but we're not there yet.
Well, the reason I disagreed was based on the negative connotations of the word gang in the first place. My name is Ada, and I'm a writer and a speaker, and I focus mainly on socio-cultural issues. When we hear gang, we think of a group of usually young people, right, who are set out to carry out illegal activities and so on. Whereas the police are designed to maintain order, enforce laws. Now it's progressing more in improving the community, you know, being present in the community and so on and so forth. So I can't then agree that the police are the biggest gang. I do understand that due to media, sometimes selective media coverage, the police are seen as sort of brute on feeling robots and racist, right? And then that translates to them being bullies, which then translates to them being a menace and then being a gang, and then therefore, of course, as one of the biggest groups and institutions in the country, then yes, you can say that they are the biggest gang.
I understand when you say selective media, which means that they come across as like brutes and bullies, but I feel like that doesn't denote what they're doing. So even though their media coverage may be bad, I also think that there is like freedom of speech, and we do have a right to hold people to accountability. I understand human error and all of that kind of stuff does get in the way, but as the people, and as the people who are trying to like show the people what's happening and what's on the ground, I do think we have a right to like speculate on the people who are meant to be maintaining that order, because if we don't, then what standard do we have? I'm Annabelle, and I educate on anti-racism, human rights, EDI and social justice on TikTok. And I also work part-time as a EDI consultant for financial services.
My point with the selectiveness, especially when it comes to racialization of events. For example, I read something the other day about a young boy who was punched in the face. He was handcuffed. He was 15 years old. And you would have a headline that would say a young black boy, right, was punched by a white officer. But then throughout the story, you would have something like the young teenager was just maybe mouthing off to the police officer. So just to break it down, why wouldn't they say a young black teenager was being disrespectful or so on and so forth? So in that side, it's like, well, race is not important. But for the headline and to draw out that outrage, then it became a racial event. I mean, I've dealt with the police, good and bad. I've had friends who've dealt with the police, good and bad. Whereas I feel that some who have negative ideas about the police have it vicariously, which means that it's based on other people's experiences or the media's experiences, not even their own.
When we see like unnecessary like racialization and stuff like that, I think, well, I hold the belief that if something disproportionately affects a group of like marginalized people, it is race-based. So if like the media are saying that, okay, well, young black children are being like beat up by the police and stuff like that, that's because they're being beat up by the police disproportionately to their white counterparts. Race is an underlying factor, and I do think that it's important to call that out.
I feel safe in the presence of a police officer. If you agree, stay. If you disagree, leave.
I don't think I feel safe or unsafe.
Have you had much police contact yourself?
No, not really.
I'm similar to you. I don't feel safe or unsafe, but it does depend on the situation for me. So in my younger days, when I wasn't getting up to a lot of good things, I will say that I felt nervous. I wouldn't say unsafe, but I felt nervous around the police. However, now it does depend on the situation. I think you mentioned you wouldn't feel like comfortable to go up to the police. I would, and I would actually search for, okay, is police around, especially as a woman, but yeah, I definitely would say that I feel safer than not with police.
Yeah. I've been like robbed before, I've been like defrauded before. Those experiences with the police haven't been super helpful. So like, in that context, I wouldn't go up to them seeking safety, but it would be dishonest to say I felt really unsafe when I was around them.
I've been a police officer for 5 years, so I've worked with police basically every working day. I always wanted to do this, so I never had much fear or animosity or anxiety around police before I joined when I was younger. I didn't have any particularly negative experiences growing up. I think you mentioned earlier when you said you were young, when you were younger and up to not so much. Always the best things, and you were naturally on edge, but I think that's kind of the point. If you are doing wrong, then we would naturally make you uncomfortable, but that's the point. That's our job. There are people who, to be blunt, I'm supposed to make their lives as uncomfortable as possible because their very existence is to do that to the general public. Now, the tragedy is when innocent bystanders, people who really haven't done anything wrong or going about their daily lives, when they have that same feel, that same angst, that's the tragedy.
I think that statement that you mentioned, that your job is to make the lives of some people uncomfortable, I think that is my biggest problem with the police. I know that even the kind of training sometimes can lead them to enter situations already sort of prejudging the outcome and how things will go, marking a person, how a person is, and that stifles you.
So yeah, if someone is in a place or is willing or, wants to make changes or, wants a different lifestyle or looks for something else, then they should be supported in that. There are organisations better placed for that kind of stuff, but the police shouldn't be a barrier for someone better in their lives. Yeah, the style of policing that they experience should evolve and reflect that. Just because someone has a criminal record in the past doesn't necessarily mean that every time I interact with them, I'm up here.
Do you think that attitude is undermined a bit by like racial profiling and stuff like that? Like when you talk about it's my job to make criminals feel uncomfortable or whatever, the first place that my mind went to was a job that I worked on last year, which was to do with stop and search and to do with like the proportion to which black people were overrepresented in stop and search cases. Everybody knows about this now, everybody's talked about this.
Yeah.
Like, do you not think that's an example of making people uncomfortable before there's any evidence of them being a criminal?
There's so much nuance to it. It's got so many layers. It's a really, really powerful tool that the police have to often prevent further offences and further harm. But it does come, like with anything, it does come with the other side, is you often get people who are stopped who didn't have anything on them, for example. We use that as an example. But then the nuance comes in. Just because I didn't, for example, find a knife on you doesn't mean that the search wasn't justified. Let me give an example, right? Something happens, a madness happens on the high street. We get a call and someone gives a description. If that's the only information we've got, that's the only information we've got. If it's a really good description, then it's really helpful. If it's really good, really specific, they give me a direction of travel, I know the time, I know the road they went on, you can use that. So for example, if they had a specific clothing or there's something about them that makes them stand out from other people, then that level of information, that level of intel can be used to find the person who's as close matches that description as possible and stop them. So that's the best way I can describe it. And sometimes the descriptions we get are really poor. That's when you have to be more flexible and think more cognitively about, okay, this is the description I've got, it's not that good. And then you have to kind of weigh it up in your head, risk versus reward.
And that's a really fair reason for why you would stop somebody who might be innocent, but that's not necessarily an explanation for why it's so racialized statistically. Like, on an individual level, yeah, you go out and everybody would be represented proportionally if it was just based off of
sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, I was going to say that's not true.
Well, just one sentence, I promise. Well, the reason it's not proportionate is because the crime level is not proportionate. In London, I'm not going to talk about UK, but I know that's uncomfortable, but that is the fact. And I think the problem with statistics is how you can use them to mislead and lie. For example, we like to miss the part that a young black boy is 24 times likely to be stabbed than a young white boy.
To answer the question, I don't feel safe in front of the police, but I don't feel unsafe. So the reason I don't feel safe is because of personal experiences. So all the times I've had interactions with the police, one incident when I was being followed home after work, one incident with mental health crisis, within my family, every single time I was either not listened to or it was just not taken seriously. I remember calling the police when I was being followed home and nothing really happened, no action was really taken. And they told me, I don't know, wait at a bus station or something like that, even though the bus station was empty. And in my area, we don't do 24-hour buses. So the next bus was 8 a.m. and there was nothing I can do in that situation. So that's why personally, I don't feel safe, but I don't feel unsafe. So I'm not saying that, they have something against me, so I feel actively unsafe. But I'm saying they haven't taken enough steps to make me feel safe, so I don't feel safe.
The harsh reality is, it's not possible to do all the time. It's not possible to logistically, it just can't happen. There isn't enough of us. We don't have the resources for every single incident that we should be at.
There is a need for more black police officers.
If black people account for 3.3% of the UK population, how much more black people do you want in the police force? And it supposes the idea that, again, that putting black people in the police force means we come with a certain ideology or political opinion. So I think, to me, it's a bit of a devoid question, but I think there's places and people that would argue very differently.
We don't recruit very well from the areas where we spend most of our time. Now, some of that is probably done to themselves, right? Bad police practices and experience in areas, in communities, means that those communities are less comfortable coming forward and doing it themselves. I think they get things like traitor and stuff, which I've had all before. But I think for me, it's really, 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 really important. And when you said talking about numbers, the numbers of how many police would be enough, well, it depends on the area, right? So if certain areas of the country have a higher black, higher Asian population, so their police forces should reflect, in an ideal world, should reflect that. In areas that are maybe more rural or more ethnically white areas, then you would expect their representation to be less, right? Because if you're recruiting from that area, in an ideal world, you should reflect that.
Isn't that technically just positive discrimination? If you're recruiting selectively from certain areas to have certain communities. And I'm not saying I disagree with it, but to fight against what we're going through, does it mean we discriminate on certain grounds and certain characteristics? Isn't that technically counterproductive if the police are supposed to serve all?
If you want a different outcome, you need to change. You need to change your approach.
And you made a point that because someone's from the ends, they know the ends. Like, perhaps someone might not have the wherewithal to understand people in the ends, but they grew up in the ends. And this is why I think a lot of these answers are multifaceted and multi-layered. They're not just a one-size-fits-all. Like, absolutely. I've been stopped and searched once in my life, just once, and all my friends laugh at me. When I was walking through the market, police officer said, "Can we stop and search you?" I was like, "Go ahead." I gave him my stuff and the officer looked surprised. I felt like he was expecting a war with me. And then he gave me, I think it was a slip. This was when I was younger. And I just carried on in my day. But when I spoke to my friend, he was like, "No, you can't have that. That's not supposed to be like that." And I said, whatever issues you've got, you handle your stuff somewhere else. Whatever happens to me is what happens to me, if that makes sense. And I think this is why you can't, well, you can positively discriminate if you want to. And I think it's the RAF are doing it. They're only recruiting ethnic minorities and no longer recruiting white.
Well, I wouldn't go so far to say only, because you could end up missing out on really great talent. Yeah.
I haven't spoken much, but so this question, obviously I disagreed, but I'm not saying I agree, but like I have this really specific example in my head where like, so there's like a running joke in like Jamaican communities that in our houses we have machetes. My name is Jamar. I'm a freelance writer, public speaker, campaigner, and I work as a youth action coordinator. For a long time, my mum did have a machete in our house. Cool. And I just imagine like if a police officer came to our house and saw it, if they didn't have that cultural understanding that this is just a thing that we have in our houses, what would they do?
I got one at home too.
Exactly, and that's why it's, in my opinion, that's why it's so important. It's get cultural understanding of knowing what to expect behind the door.
But then let's say a black Jamaican family calls you. I'm trying to put this into just practical reality, right? Mm-hmm. So a black Jamaican family calls you. The call handler goes, "So where are you from ethnically?" I'm black and I'm Jamaican. So you're going to call a black Jamaican officer and say, "Let's go and tend to that."
No.
No, come on. And this is what I mean. I think there's a fantastical reality sometimes we try to create in our heads. Yeah. But let's get realistic with the case.
Just a very quick point. I think because you brought up your heritage, I would love to make that distinction with a lot of things anyway when it comes to police, and we have to make a distinction between race and culture. When we say, for example, I'm Nigerian, we have Western machetes in our houses, but do you know what I mean? So you say, I'm disagreeing with myself a little bit now. Let's have more black police officers. What does that mean
what does it mean?
to individual units?
But the thing is, I disagree. I don't want more black police officers, but I'm just saying, because
it doesn't work in reality.
Because you touched on it. I feel like it's not about having more black police officers. It's about having more cultural understanding and knowledge. And obviously, the easiest way to get that is if you employ different people from different backgrounds, blah blah blah. Yeah. But at the same time, from my own personal experiences, anytime a police officer has been in my house, I have never given about their race. I'm just seeing police officers in my house, and I'm scared.
So even if you get like a reflective police force, you're getting these people who relate to the culture, all of that kind of stuff, to do extra work compared to their white counterparts. You're saying that, okay, well, when they come in, they understand, okay, the machete in the house, all of that kind of stuff, they can relate. That's a form of work. You're getting them to understand on a different way just because of where they come from. So what if they're there, so you have like one black and then one white. So now the black person's going to be like, oh, okay, well, I understand. The black police officer will be like, I understand. So then now it's his job to now turn to the white police officer and be like, okay, well, the machete's there. This is a cultural thing that we have. So now he's doing on the ground work.
Okay.
So all that is extra work. That is the job.
The
job is to understand people and have them understand you, and then to relay that to your colleagues. So,
but is that what the white police officers are doing?
That's exactly.
They should do that. But why is your solution getting more black people to come in and do the work and not teach the white people as well?
But the thing is, you know, some black people would say it's not our job to teach white people about racism. But this is what I mean. There's no answer. There's no representative, you know, poll where everyone goes, let's teach white people about racism. But then some people go, we shouldn't be teaching them. We have no consensus on anything. We're just individuals arguing different viewpoints on different solutions and about this pretty much the same problem.
But I think it's, quite contradictory sometimes, because you sort of hear, well, even though I don't think it, like if I'm Nigerian and I'm a police officer, it's not extra work for me to go to a Nigerian house and understand the culture, and it's not extra work for me personally, but I guess that's anecdotal. But I think what I find crazy about some of these conversations generally, not just here, is the contradiction of desires in outcomes. So it's not fair and it's not your job to teach a white person about our culture, let's simplify it. And then it's, on the other hand, well, it's not your job as a white person to presume based on whatever you've read, whatever you've been told. So how can we get it right? How can we move forward?
We can't.
Right?
Well,
because there's no consensus.
I think it's really important to not let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? Just because something doesn't solve all the problems doesn't mean it's not worth doing. So when you said about should the officer then speak to the other colleagues about, my answer would be, yeah, you should, because that helps everyone understand the situation. If everyone's in a mutual understanding, things are less likely to go pear-shaped, and everyone leaves safely, and that's the goal. And yet it does seem like the burden, we shouldn't have to go and teach other people we shouldn't have to teach white people about our race, it should be up to them. But sometimes you've got to meet them in the middle. People can only go so far.
I get meet them in the middle and people can only do so far, but where are the efforts that they're making? Like, where is the, okay, well, we're trying to, get local community leaders to come and teach us about all of that kind of stuff?
Well, this is it.
They do. Yeah, I think from a lot of the work I've done, I have seen that truthfully happen. Like, I'd be wrong to say it doesn't happen. Do you know what I mean? But
I've certainly experienced it, and that's what we're trying to do. That's what we do.
Because, for example, let's say the COVID thing. Let's just hypothetically say it was a white officer and a South Asian officer, and they got a call. Okay, there's a big house. Then let's just say, no, this is how our culture is, kind of thing. So what I want to say is that let's say it was two white officers, and it's like, they said, well, this is how the culture is, then it will become what you said earlier, it's a stereotype.
It's true.
Right? So that's why I think it has to be a mutual thing rather than, well, why do we have to teach you about our culture, right? We're living in the United Kingdom. You called it a white majority country, rightly so, but there are certain cultures and norms here, but it's a diverse place. So it's not a formal, or it shouldn't be a formal thing of, now I have a burden of teaching you. It's your culture, it shouldn't be a burden anyway, as they maybe teach you their ways and so on and so forth.
Which is like, I understand that as well, but if two white police officers go into a thing, then like you said before, South Asian people tend to have bigger families. How's that a stereotype?
No, it's not a stereotype, but what I'm saying is that when it comes from them, it becomes, well, it's racism, and it's
the context.
They're presuming, no matter what they say, well, but because you're saying that they should do, the white people should do the work. And I'm telling you from experience that any work they do becomes, well, just because you're white and just because you've done the work doesn't mean that you can comment on that.
I have trouble believing that. So if two white police officers go in and they're like, okay, well, this family is South Asian, they tend to have bigger families. So it's like, okay, well, rather than issuing fines, we're going to talk and we're going to be like, okay, I understand. And then the South Asian person goes, oh yeah, but this is my brother, I haven't seen them in a long time. For the police officers to have that and know the tendencies and know how different communities interact with each other, how does that become racialized? How does that not racialization culture understand it?
Can I give you an example outside of race? So when Molly May went on Stephen Bartlett's podcast, she said everyone has the same 24 hours, right? Everybody lambasted her on the internet. Male capitalists for years and successful coaches have been saying the exact same thing, but Molly May took the brunt. No one attacked all those men for years saying the exact same thing. Most people said most young boys look up to these kind of venture capitalists. And I think there's a lot of times where if someone else from a certain race says something, it does become a stereotype and it becomes discrimination. And I'm just trying to be as honest as possible. And it's not that I don't disagree with you, and it's not that I don't agree, but it's tougher than that, because it's all about, it becomes context and it becomes very situational, and who you're hearing it from. And so like Kemi Badenoch, right? She makes a lot of comments about critical race theory and she doesn't agree with a lot of stuff. If that came from white people, people would call her racist, but because she's black, they call her a coon and a sellout and all sorts. We're starting to find different mountains of which we're trying to climb.
Police officers nowadays have become enforcers as opposed to protectors.
To enforce is to protect.
So you disagree then?
No, I disagree with the lining of the question.
You agree?
You think okay, so basically you think enforcing and protecting is one?
Well, they're synonymous. To enforce something,
really.
Well, to protect is to enforce the law, whether or not we agree with it or not.
I'm not convinced that the law really does protect.
No, of course. I don't think we're disagreeing on that, because the police in America are originally slave catchers, right? And police in the UK, they were originally created to protect the upper class. That's essentially what their role was. Like, you don't go into a burning building and try to take your belongings, right? Some people would argue the building's burnt, you can't do anything with it unless you want to, use the embers to build whatever you want. But if you know that the law is unjust, whatever you enforce, whether or not it protects the people or not, on paper, that's what it's supposed to do. Whether it does it in reality is very different.
I disagree that the police in the UK were created, or let's say formalized, to protect the upper class. And I think that's why I find it interesting when we say that the police don't protect today. I find that statement quite odd, because it's like, well, we all, I think, nowadays, we all have access to private property in any way. So, I'm just trying to imagine if that's being tampered with, or if your house is being broken into, for example, like, who do you call? And these are the people, you don't call, some people do, your neighbor, family members, but the first people you call is the police. And I remember when my house was burgled when I was a student, and that was my first and only bad experience with the police, because my house was burgled and I felt in that situation. I mean, protection is quite difficult, isn't it? Because technically to protect means that shouldn't have happened. There should have been some kind of system or them present to prevent that, because that's what protection is. If this thing falls down, protection means that I shield so it doesn't hurt him. Whereas I think the police, if we go by the literal statement, they don't really protect, right?
They punish.
They punish and they come to resolve.
That's why they're enforcing.
I think they come to resolve. If there's a stabbing that's taken place, that boy's dead, so that boy's not been protected. But they come to resolve and take it. So I think it's quite difficult, this word protect.
From my experience, whenever me or someone around me has discussed a bad experience with police officers, it's not that we are trying to focus on those bad experiences and like just highlight them and make it have huge media coverage, all that kind of stuff. Okay, how do we address this? Like,
it's about you.
But like at the same time, I rarely ever meet people who are willing to have a proper discussion about rectifying it. Not all police officers are bad, and that does nothing for me. That doesn't help.
If that's your only response, is not all police officers are bad, then you're right, you haven't helped. But if your response is the police it always goes right, that also isn't helpful. Yeah, and it's true, not all police officers are bad. I can't put a number on it, but it would be close to 99%.
I mean, that's great, like I said, but that does nothing for me. Because in my head, I'm thinking about when I was a youth worker and I worked in a charity in Brixton, and like the kids that I work with, like I'm hearing that, they've been stopped and searched in their front door in front of their mum and the police officer tripped them up and pinned them to the floor, that kind of thing. It does nothing for them or my thoughts of them.
Yeah.
I used to work for Inquest, the only charity in the UK that looks at state-related death. And many people had mental health breakdowns and the police got called and they end up dead.
Yeah.
Like, it does nothing. Saying that 90% of police being good or have good outcomes does nothing.
When if you end up in the 1%, then it's meaningless.
Yeah.
Can I also jump in?
I agree.
Here? You said before that like we should look at everything, so we shouldn't like focus on like just the bad stuff, and we should also realize that, you know, like 90% of like police officers are good. But I also think that when things do go bad, people tend to get upset. They have outrage because this is their community. Like, it's all like, I don't think there's anything wrong with people getting upset. Like a hurt community grieving and making their grievances known, because, I mean, you don't, it's difficult to tell people who, you know, may not be directly may not be directly related to the incident, but, you know, may match the description of someone who was like killed or someone who was like, all of that kind of stuff. Like, for me personally, when I'm seeing that, oh, you know, a missing black woman on the day that she was reported missing was turned away from like the police station, like, it's all right for people to feel outraged. It's all right for people to actually critique what's happening, even if it may be the smallest 1%, because it's what people, like, it's the fight for justice, it's the fight for equality that people believe in as well. So it's hard to say, okay, well, look at the big picture, all of that kind of stuff, when it's affecting you or your community.
I'm sorry, I go further.
Yeah.
And so on social media, every now and then, there's fathers, sometimes especially black fathers, who they post, I don't know, a video or story about them being a father to their child, and then they get all this praise. And then there's a set of people that come in and say, why are you getting praised for doing your job? I feel like we shouldn't be praising, I mean, every now and then praise is good, but I don't think we should be praising police officers for doing their job. We should, like, when something goes wrong, we should point it out so we can fix it and sort it out. But
I don't...
No, I'm not saying that they get praised per se, but like saying, you know, 90% police officers do a good job, okay, that's what they're supposed to do, no?
Yeah.
Like, isn't that what we're all expecting to be protected?
Yeah.
So
like these people, like the people that we're talking about, the 1% of people that we are talking about, like these people were people, they had a family, they had friends, all of that kind of stuff. Like when we're talking about, I don't know, like Nicole Smallman and like Bibba Henry, when they were accused of killing each other, when it was a third party who went to go and kill them, and then they would, like, their death was joked about amongst police officers and all of that kind of stuff. When we're seeing that, we're seeing parallels. You're like, oh my gosh, like what if this was me? These were two young black sisters. Like, what is the difference? Because, you know, we're not getting the full story, but we're getting the way that it's impacting our community. It's all right for us to be angry. It's all right for us to have distrust, because where is the trust coming from? We can't say, okay, yeah, but like, this isn't a lot, this is just the 1%, but that 1%, it still matters.
Sorry, I don't want to say it's just 1%. I don't want to feel like we're just attacking you, but but like, to use my own lived experience as an example, the first time my parents got arrested, I wasn't there, but from my understanding, my brother, he was 16 at the time, and he's like 6'3". They thought he was an adult, they handcuffed him. I don't know to what extent, what kind of force they used, but they handcuffed him. Then they realized he was a child, they uncuffed him, put him in a black cab to go do his GCSE that day. To this day, no one has ever dissected that event with him. I feel like there's a lot of harm, there's a lot of issues that no one has addressed it, and I don't have the capacity to do that. And I know you mentioned before therapy and that kind of stuff, but the NHS is tapped out.
Yeah, shambolic.
Do you know what I mean? So like, and then there's my little sister who, you know, saw her parents get arrested, and then she also had to go to school, and when I got to my house, my room was trashed, and I had a lot of trauma to this day, PTSD from that and other interactions with the police. But the point is that there's children involved there, and for me, it's children have, if my brother and sister now, for the rest of their life, have some sort of, I know I PTSD from seeing police officers. Your presence right now, like I said to you before, it makes me feel slightly uncomfortable, which is why it took me so long to even speak. I can't speak for my brother and sister, but if they do have some sort of ill feeling towards the police and that kind of stuff, I feel like it's too much to ask them to now, you know, go sort yourself out. Trust police officers, they're here to protect you.